They say the courtroom is a place of justice, a stage where truth battles lies. But no one could have imagined that on this particular day justice would speak through the voice of an 8-year-old girl, ragged, hungry, and barefoot, who pointed her tiny finger at the judge and declared, "I can defend him." Hey everyone, welcome back to Dream Tale, where stories touch your heart and make you believe in the impossible. If you're visiting this channel for the first time, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You never know, your support might help someone else find hope in their darkest hour. Let me ask you a question. Would you trust an 8-year-old to defend you in court if your entire life was on the line? Today's story will challenge what you think you know about strength, courage, and the power of gratitude. It's the unbelievable journey of a young millionaire who lost everything in a flash. His reputation, his freedom, even his lawyer. But just when the world turned its back on him, someone stepped forward. Not a famous attorney. Not a powerful friend. But a little girl from the streets who once received a warm meal from him when she had nothing. She had no degree, no legal training, no money, but she had something the millionaire's lawyer didn't: loyalty. She remembered the one moment when a stranger treated her like a human being. And when she saw that same man in handcuffs, tears in his eyes, with no one left to fight for him, she didn't hesitate. She walked into the courtroom, stood tall on trembling legs, and said something that left everyone speechless. But how did things reach such a point? Who betrayed the millionaire? And what gave that little girl the courage to speak when everyone else stayed silent? This story matters not just because it's dramatic or emotional, but because it reveals how a single act of kindness can echo through time and come back to save a life. In a world that often values power over principle, this tale proves that the smallest voices sometimes carry the loudest truths. So sit back, stay with us till the end, and prepare yourself for a roller coaster of emotions. Because by the time you hear what happened in that courtroom, you won't be the same. Let's begin. His name was Ryan Carter. At just 28 years old, he was one of the youngest self-made millionaires in the country. A tech entrepreneur, philanthropist, and media darling, Ryan was the symbol of what hard work, intelligence, and vision could achieve. People looked up to him. Investors trusted him. And the world wanted to be like him. But all that changed in an instant. It started with whispers, rumors about mismanaged funds, data breaches, insider deals. At first, Ryan ignored them. "It's just jealousy," he'd say with a confident smile. "People don't like seeing someone win this young." But the whispers grew louder. News anchors began mentioning his name in connection with an alleged fraud investigation. Online articles speculated about shady dealings in his company's latest project. And suddenly, his once flawless reputation began to crack. Ryan was arrested during a business conference. Cameras flashed as officers escorted him out in handcuffs. His team was stunned. His investors panicked. Social media exploded with hashtags demanding justice and punishment. Without a trial, without evidence, the public had already decided he was guilty. The accusation? Embezzlement of over $12 million and falsifying company data to inflate investor returns. According to the authorities, Ryan had built a house of lies. But Ryan knew the truth: he had been framed. Someone inside the company had manipulated records. Someone he had trusted. He was thrown into a holding cell, confused and angry. His phone calls were monitored. His requests for privacy were denied. And the media painted him as a slick, manipulative con artist who had fooled everyone. Headlines read, "Tech Golden Boy" or "Tech Scammer." Overnight, Ryan Carter became a villain. But it wasn't just public image he was losing. His assets were frozen. His company's board voted to remove him as CEO. Friends distanced themselves. Sponsors pulled out. His family was bombarded with reporters and threats. In just 3 days, Ryan went from beloved to betrayed. His only hope rested on his lawyer, a top-tier defense attorney named Gerald Weston. Gerald had handled dozens of high-profile cases and was known for pulling off miracles in court. Ryan trusted him completely. After all, Gerald had been with him since the early days. But as pressure mounted and public outrage intensified, even Gerald began to hesitate. The trial date was set. Ryan sat alone in his cold cell, wondering who had stabbed him in the back. Was it a co-founder? A disgruntled employee? Or someone even closer? All he knew was that he hadn't done what they were accusing him of. But proving that seemed impossible, especially when powerful people wanted to see him fall. And then came the morning of the trial. Ryan stood in his suit, wrists shackled, escorted into the courtroom. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned forward. The world was watching. He looked around, searching for the one man who had promised to stand by him. But Gerald Weston was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the court clerk handed him a folded letter. Ryan opened it with trembling hands. The message was brief. I can't continue representing you. It's too risky. I'm sorry. Good luck. His lawyer had abandoned him. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. The judge slammed her gavel for silence. Ryan's heart dropped. Betrayal, again. First the public, then the system. Now the man who had sworn to fight for him. He sat down slowly at the defendant's table, empty beside him, alone in a sea of faces waiting to see him lose. His mouth went dry. His mind raced. Was this it? Was his fate sealed? And then, before anyone could say a word, there was a sound. Small, soft, but firm. From the crowd, a voice rang out. I can defend him. Everyone turned. Judges, lawyers, the audience, even Ryan. Standing there at the back of the courtroom was a little girl, no older than 8. Her clothes were worn. Her shoes were torn. But her eyes held something powerful. Conviction. She took a step forward, then another. The courtroom was stunned into silence. Ryan stared, confused. Who was she? Why was she here? And why did she look so familiar? Gerald Weston had been more than just a lawyer to Ryan. He was a mentor, a friend, and, at times, like a second father. He was there during Ryan's first big investment pitch. He helped set up Ryan's first company. He even toasted him at the company's 5-year anniversary, calling him the future of business with a heart. So when the charges hit, Gerald was the first person Ryan called. And at first, Gerald responded like a true friend. Don't worry, he said confidently. This is just a mess. We'll clear it up. I've handled worse. He shook hands with Ryan's family, assured the media they had no comment, and walked into that jail cell like a knight with a sword drawn. But as the days went by, something changed. Gerald stopped answering calls as quickly. He canceled meetings. When he did visit, he looked nervous, distracted. He began to hint at pressure from people above. This case is getting political, he said during one visit. They're not just trying to punish you, they're trying to make an example out of you. Ryan didn't understand. But I'm innocent, he repeated over and over. Gerald nodded. That doesn't matter right now. It became clear Gerald was scared. Not just of losing, but of what losing might do to his career. Clients were dropping him. Sponsors were withdrawing. His face was now being shown on the same news channels that had once celebrated him as a courtroom genius. Only this time with words like defending a fraud attached. Then came the meeting 3 days before the trial. Gerald looked tired. Hello, Ryan. I need to be honest, he said. I'm getting threats. People are digging into my past, my family. They're saying if I keep defending you, they'll release things that could destroy my firm. Ryan stared at him. So you're backing out? Gerald sighed. I'm thinking about it. Ryan stood up. You know I didn't do this. You know I'm being set up. You told me yourself. I did, Gerald whispered. But I have a family, Ryan. A reputation. I can't risk everything. That was the last real conversation they had. Now, in the courtroom, Ryan sat stunned as he reread the short, heartless note Gerald had left him. I can't continue representing you. It's too risky. I'm sorry. Good luck. Risky. That word burned in Ryan's mind. What happened to loyalty? What happened to justice? Gerald had built his entire career preaching about standing up for what's right. Yet now, when it mattered most, he chose silence. The judge asked if Ryan had new representation. All he could do was shake his head. I have no lawyer. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. The prosecution smirked. The media, hungry for drama, scribbled notes and whispered into recorders. Ryan lowered his head. This was it. They were going to crush him. But then, before another word could be said, a tiny voice echoed across the courtroom. I can defend him. It was almost surreal. Everyone froze. At the back of the room stood a small girl. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her hands were clenched. Her chin was high. She wore a faded dress and her hair was braided unevenly, as if she had done it herself. The judge blinked in disbelief. Excuse me? The girl stepped forward again. I said, I can defend him. There was laughter. Scoffs. One man in the gallery muttered, What is this, a joke? But the judge held up her hand. Young lady, who are you? The girl looked straight at Ryan, then back at the judge. Her voice didn't shake. My name is Zoe, and I owe that man everything. The courtroom was silent. Ryan's mind raced. Zoe? Why did that name sound familiar? She walked slowly toward the defense table, ignoring the stares and whispers. Her shoes squeaked slightly on the polished floor. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. I may not be a lawyer, she said, but I know the truth. And I know he didn't do this. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. And how do you know that? Zoe turned to Ryan. Because when I was hungry, when I had no one and no name, he fed me. The room went still. Cameras stopped flashing. Even the judge leaned back in her chair, stunned. Ryan turned slowly to face the girl. For a second he didn't speak. His mind dug through fragments of his past, charity events, shelters he had visited, children he had helped. And then it hit him. A cold winter evening. A park bench. A small, shivering girl with dirt on her face and torn shoes. He had just left a business meeting when he saw her crying, clutching a broken backpack and a crushed paper bag. Something about her had stopped him in his tracks. He bought her food from a nearby stall, hot soup, bread, and a warm blanket from his car. She had looked up at him with those same big eyes and whispered, "Thank you." He never saw her again. Until now. "Zoe," he murmured. She nodded. The judge cleared her throat. "Young lady, do you realize where you are? This is a courtroom. You can't just walk up and—" "I know," Zoe said softly. "But nobody else is speaking for him. I thought this was where people came to tell the truth." The courtroom gasped again. Zoe turned to the judge. "He didn't hurt anyone. He helped me. I was just a girl on the street and everyone else walked by. But he didn't. He stopped. He gave me food and money and he told me I mattered." The judge tried to regain composure. "You're very brave. But you're not allowed to legally represent anyone." "I'm not here to file papers," Zoe said. "I'm here to speak the truth." A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor stood, clearly annoyed. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. We cannot allow a child to interrupt legal proceedings. This is not a playground." The judge raised her hand again. "Sit down, Mr. Wilkes. I want to hear this." Zoe looked directly at the prosecutor. "You said Ryan lied. That he cheated. But I know he's not that kind of person. Because when someone helps a girl like me with nothing to gain, they don't do it for fame. They do it because they're good." The judge leaned forward. "Zoe, how old are you?" "8. I turn 9 next month." "And where are your parents?" Zoe hesitated. I don't have any. I live in the shelter on 3rd Street. A hushed murmur passed through the room. Now people weren't just shocked, they were listening. The judge looked over at Ryan, who hadn't spoken since Zoe arrived. "Mr. Carter," she said, "do you recognize this girl?" Ryan's voice was quiet. "Yes, I remember her. I gave her a meal one night. She was cold. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days." The judge looked back at Zoe. "And since then?" Zoe shrugged. "I never saw him again. But I remembered what he did. I remembered how it felt when someone cared. And I started reading books about the law, about courts, about people who stand up for others. I even practiced pretending to be a lawyer with the other kids in the shelter." There was a moment of silence before she added, "Because I told myself, if I ever get the chance, I'll help someone like he helped me." The courtroom was dead quiet. Even the prosecutor didn't know how to respond. Zoe turned to Ryan. "You didn't do this. I know it. I don't care if you have money or not. You were kind when no one else was. And I believe people like that don't suddenly turn bad." Ryan blinked, his eyes glassy. He had been humiliated, betrayed, abandoned, but now a girl with nothing was standing in his defense. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The judge folded her hands. "Zoe, I admire your courage. But the law is very strict. You cannot act as legal counsel." "I know," Zoe whispered. "But can I still tell my story? Can I still speak the truth?" The judge paused. And then, to the shock of everyone, she said, "Yes. You may speak." The courtroom, once buzzing with whispers and murmurs, was now silent. So silent that you could hear the ticking of the wall clock echoing in the background. All eyes were on Zoe as she stood bravely in front of the courtroom. The judge leaned forward slightly, her gavel resting quietly on the desk. "Go ahead, Zoe. You have the floor." Zoe looked around, her voice soft at first but clear. "I know I'm not big. I know I'm not smart like all the people here. But I know what it feels like to be forgotten. And I know what it feels like when someone remembers you." She looked at Ryan and smiled. "Mr. Carter didn't know my name. He didn't ask me where I came from. But he gave me food, warmth, and something more. He made me feel like I mattered. That's not something you forget." The room remained frozen as Zoe continued. "I live in a shelter with other kids. We don't have much. Sometimes we go to sleep hungry. Sometimes we don't even get to go to school. But after he helped me that night, I went back to the shelter and I made a promise to myself. That I would be someone someday. That I would be brave. Just like he was that night. The judge listened closely. The jury, silent and still, was visibly moved. Some of them glanced at Ryan, others at Zoe, unsure how to react to the quiet power of her words. The prosecutor looked uncomfortable. His strategy had never accounted for this. A child, so pure and determined, standing as the only voice in defense of a man the world had already judged guilty. Zoe turned to him. You're saying he stole money? That he tricked people? But what would he get from helping me? I didn't have anything. No cameras, no news. Just me. And he still helped. She took a small folded paper from her pocket and held it up. This is the note he left with the food. Says, you matter. Never forget that. I kept it. Every night. I read it when I'm scared. The courtroom gasped softly. Even the judge was taken aback. Zoe handed the note to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. She unfolded it slowly. The writing was real. Messy, rushed, but it was Ryan's handwriting. The date matched. The name signed at the bottom confirmed it. Ryan looked down, his heart heavy. He had forgotten about that note, but she hadn't. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Carter, do you recognize this? Yes, Your Honor. That's my handwriting. I left that note for her that night. Zoe nodded. He didn't know I'd ever see him again. He just wanted me to feel like I was worth something. The judge paused. Zoe, thank you. You've said more than many grown men do in their lifetime. Zoe stepped back, hands folded, her task complete. She didn't need applause or praise. She had done what no one else dared. She had spoken for the truth. The silence lingered, not from awkwardness, but from awe. One juror wiped her eye. Another leaned in closer, rereading his notes, now with a new perspective. The prosecutor stood slowly, unsure of how to respond. Your Honor, while we appreciate the girl's testimony, it is irrelevant to the financial records and evidence presented. But isn't character part of truth? The judge interrupted gently. And hasn't this court just witnessed a powerful example of that? The prosecutor fell silent. For the first time in days, Ryan felt like he could breathe. Not because his case had suddenly turned in his favor, but because someone believed in him. Someone small. Someone forgotten by the world, just like he now was. And she had reminded everyone, including him, that who you are when no one is watching matters more than anything else. As the judge carefully placed Zoe's note on the table beside her, the courtroom sat in thoughtful stillness. What began as a formal legal proceeding had turned into something far more human. The law was still in session, yes, but now the truth had entered the room, carried by a child. Ryan sat frozen, but not from fear. His mind was traveling back in time, retracing the steps of a night he'd buried under the weight of success. It had been over a year ago. He was leaving a conference in a downtown hotel, frustrated from a day of difficult investors and long meetings. He had slipped out through the back exit, not wanting to deal with cameras or shallow handshakes. That's when he saw her. A tiny girl sitting alone on a bench, knees to her chest, her backpack ripped, her lips shivering in the cold air. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even crying. She just looked forgotten. Something about that image pierced through Ryan's stress. He walked up to her, unsure of what to say. She flinched at first, but he gently crouched down and asked, "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. She just stared at him with eyes far older than her age. Without a word, Ryan stood, crossed the street, and bought a cup of hot soup, 2 rolls of bread, and a small apple from a nearby vendor. He returned and placed them in her hands. Then, searching for something, anything, that could stay with her, he scribbled a quick note on a napkin. You matter. Never forget that, Ryan. He tucked the napkin inside her backpack. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She had already said it, with her eyes. That night was never meant to be remembered. It wasn't a PR stunt. It wasn't captured on camera. It was just kindness, raw, honest, and unrecorded. And now that moment had come back, not to haunt him but to defend him. Back in the courtroom, Zoe stood silently at the side. She had done her part. She had carried her truth and placed it in the middle of the storm. The judge turned to the prosecutor. You may proceed, Mr. Wilkes. But the momentum had shifted. The prosecutor's voice was strained as he resumed reviewing the financial allegations, but it was clear that something had changed. Jurors weren't just listening to facts anymore, they were feeling the story. Then, something unexpected happened. From the back of the courtroom, a man stood. His suit was expensive, his posture stiff. He looked hesitant, scared even. I'd like to speak, he said, raising his hand. The judge frowned. And who are you? My name is Daniel Keene. I worked as Chief Financial Officer at Carter Innovations, and I have something to confess. Gasps rippled through the room. Ryan turned sharply. Daniel? Daniel avoided his eyes. I can't do it anymore. I was the one who changed the numbers. I doctored the reports. I accepted money to pin it all on Ryan. The entire courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to record. One juror dropped her pen. Order. Order in the court, the judge yelled, slamming her gavel. Mr. Keene, do you realize what you're saying? Daniel nodded solemnly. Yes, Your Honor. I falsified the records. I took bribes to make Ryan look guilty. He never touched a dime. Ryan's mouth fell open. Zoe blinked slowly, watching everything unfold. The judge motioned for security to detain Daniel immediately. As he was led away, he turned to Ryan. I'm sorry, he muttered. I thought they'd protect me. But I couldn't sleep anymore. In that moment, everything turned. Zoe's words. Ryan's forgotten act of kindness. The confession. Together, they rewrote the story that had nearly destroyed an innocent man. And at the center of it all stood the smallest person in the room, the little girl who remembered. The courtroom had exploded with energy. People were standing. Reporters were shouting into microphones outside. Security had to intervene to calm the growing chaos after Daniel Keene's confession. Inside, the judge called for a short recess. Ryan sat at the defendant's table in stunned silence, his mind struggling to catch up. Just a few minutes ago, he had felt like a criminal waiting for a sentence. Now, the man who orchestrated his downfall had confessed, in front of everyone. He turned to Zoe, still standing quietly nearby. You did this, Ryan said softly. Zoe smiled shyly, not quite understanding the weight of her impact. No, you did. A long time ago. Outside the courtroom, the news spread like wildfire. Young tech CEO proven innocent. CFO confesses in courtroom bombshell. Little girl's testimony changes everything. The world that had once turned on Ryan was now rushing to celebrate him. But he didn't care about the headlines anymore. He looked at Zoe, the one person who didn't need him to be a millionaire to believe in him. After the recess, the judge returned to her seat and called the courtroom back to order. I've reviewed the confession and spoken with the officers. An investigation will continue, but based on new evidence and Daniel Keene's sworn statement, this court is prepared to dismiss all charges against Mr. Ryan Carter. The gallery gasped. Some even applauded. Ryan closed his eyes. He could finally breathe. The weight on his chest, the one that had kept him up at night, broken his spirit and crushed his faith, was finally gone. But the judge wasn't finished. Before we conclude, she said, there is one more matter to address. Miss Zoe. Zoe blinked and looked up. Yes, ma'am? You reminded this courtroom and everyone watching what courage really looks like. You did something grown men with degrees and power were too afraid to do. You stood up for the truth. On behalf of this court, thank you. Zoe didn't speak. She just gave a tiny nod, her hands still folded politely in front of her. Ryan stood and stepped toward the judge's bench. Your Honor, if I may? She nodded. He turned to face the courtroom, his voice steady for the first time in days. I lost almost everything, my name, my company, my friends. But what I gained today is worth more. I gained perspective. I gained clarity. And most importantly, I was reminded of the kind of man I want to be. He turned to Zoe. Because of her. The courtroom remained silent, eyes fixed on them both. Ryan continued, when no one else believed in me, a child did. Not for fame. Not for a reward. Just because I showed her a small kindness. And I realize now, it was never small. To her, it meant everything. The judge smiled, visibly moved. Well said, Mr. Carter. Then, from the back of the courtroom, a woman stood, a young lawyer who had been observing quietly throughout the case. She stepped forward. Your Honor, I'd like to volunteer pro bono legal support for Zoe's shelter and children like her. No child this brave should go unheard. Others followed. One offered to donate to the shelter. Another offered mentorship to Zoe. What had started as a trial was turning into something much greater, a movement. A spark of compassion lit by a child had ignited a fire in the hearts of everyone present. As the judge struck her gavel and adjourned the court, people rose, not out of obligation but out of deep respect. Ryan stepped down and walked toward Zoe. He knelt in front of her. I'll never forget what you did for me. Zoe grinned. Now we're even. No, he said. I still owe you. He reached into his coat and handed her a new note, carefully folded. Whenever you're ready, open this. Zoe tucked it into her pocket. What neither of them knew yet was that inside that note was the start of something life-changing. The courtroom emptied slowly. Some reporters ran out to break the news first, but many people simply lingered, processing what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was something bigger. Something human. Something unforgettable. Outside the courthouse, the media had gathered in massive numbers, but Ryan didn't rush to the cameras. He walked out beside Zoe, holding her hand as flashes erupted around them. A few reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Carter, how do you feel now that you've been proven innocent? Is it true the little girl saved your trial? What's next for both of you?" Ryan simply smiled, then knelt beside Zoe and asked, "Would you like to answer?" Zoe looked at the microphones and blinking red lights, then up at Ryan. She shook her head. "I just want to go home." Ryan nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." But before they left, Ryan asked his assistant to gather the press on the courthouse steps for one short announcement. He stood before them, not as the tech prodigy, not as a millionaire, but as a man who had been broken and rebuilt. "I was wrongly accused and I almost lost everything," he began. "But today wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about remembering who I am, and who I want to be." He gestured to Zoe beside him. "This young girl with no law degree, no connections and no money, defended me better than anyone else ever could. She reminded me of something I forgot in the rush of success, to see people, not just problems. To listen. To care." The cameras zoomed in. Ryan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a second folded letter. One similar to the one Zoe had carried all this time. "This morning," he continued, "I was a man trying to protect my legacy. Now I want to build a new one that includes her and kids like her." He opened the letter and read aloud. "Dear Zoe, this is your scholarship to any school you want, anywhere, anytime. When you're ready, just say the word. I'll be there." Zoe's mouth fell open. The crowd clapped. The photographers captured every second. But Ryan wasn't finished. "I'm also starting the Zoe Carter Foundation in her honor. Its mission will be to support orphaned and homeless children, provide legal guidance, scholarships, and the safety net I was blessed with, but so many others aren't." Zoe's eyes filled with tears, not because of the cameras or attention, but because someone had finally seen her. Really seen her. A few days later, news of the confession led to a full investigation. Daniel Keene faced serious charges for financial fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. More people from inside the company were exposed. And one by one, the lies that nearly ruined Ryan unraveled. The justice system this time did what it was supposed to do. Ryan's name was cleared publicly. His assets were unfrozen. His position as CEO was offered back to him. But Ryan made a choice that surprised many. He declined. Instead, he appointed someone else to run the company, someone young, passionate, and ethical. He decided to step away from the tech world at least for a while, to focus on his new mission, using his platform to give a voice to the voiceless. Meanwhile, Zoe returned to the shelter, but not for long. Within a week, she had a new home. Ryan adopted her officially, not just as a way to thank her, but because they had both filled something in each other neither had realized was missing. Zoe finally had a room of her own. Books. A bed. And more than anything, she had belonging. And Ryan? He had something far more valuable than wealth. He had peace. In the end, the girl who had once stood alone in a courtroom changed a life, a company, a system, and reminded the world that justice isn't just found in laws. Sometimes, it lives in the heart of an 8-year-old. And so, a story that began with betrayal and hopelessness ended with redemption, truth, and an unbreakable bond between a little girl with nothing and a young man who had everything, until the world turned against him. Zoe's act wasn't just brave. It was transformative. She walked into that courtroom alone not because she was qualified but because she cared. While experienced lawyers abandoned Ryan for fear of losing their status, Zoe, armed only with courage and memory, stood before a room of skeptics and spoke from the heart. And that changed everything. It reminds us of a powerful truth. Sometimes it doesn't take power or money to make a difference. Sometimes it just takes one voice, one act of kindness, one moment of courage, one person who refuses to stay silent when the world turns its back. Ryan had built empires. But the most meaningful thing he ever built was the belief in a small girl who never forgot what it meant to be seen. In return, she gave him back his freedom, his purpose, and a second chance at life. The courtroom may have ruled on the case, but Zoe? She delivered the justice. And what about us? How many people do we pass by each day, never realizing the impact a small gesture could make? A sandwich, a kind word, a moment of attention. You may forget it the next day, but someone else might carry it for a lifetime. That's why this story matters. Not just because it's emotional, not just because it ended well, but because it could be any of us. You never know who's watching, who remembers your kindness. And one day when you least expect it, that kindness might come back to stand beside you. So tell us, what would you have done in Zoe's place? Would you have had the courage to speak up, knowing the whole world was watching? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if this story touched your heart, do us a favor. Backhand index pointing right, like this video. Backhand index pointing right, share it with someone who believes in hope. Backhand index pointing right, and don't forget to subscribe to Dream Tale, where stories speak louder than headlines. Because sometimes the most powerful stories come from the most unexpected voices. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and never forget, you matter.